Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep into a period that just fascinates military history, buffs the final years, the chaotic final years of the Western Roman Empire.
It's a period that's often misunderstood. We hear about the fall of Rome, but it wasn't just one event, was it? It
Yeah.
was decades of conflict, bad decisions, missed opportunities, and you shared some incredible sources about this period, and I think they can give us some really cool insights into how empires, how armies succeed, how they fail, lessons that are still relevant today.
Yeah, and that's what we are here for, to kind of go beyond the names and dates, right? And really look at these conflicts, these battles, these figures, and see what they tell us about the course of European history, the rise and fall of power, and what it means for military strategy.
I think that's key because when we study military history, we often focus on the battles themselves.
Yeah.
But what's happening behind the scenes, the politics, the economics, the social dynamics, all of that plays a role in shaping military outcomes. And in the case of the late Roman Empire, these factors were absolutely crucial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think a good place to start would be, okay, 453 AD,
Right.
Attila the Hun dies. Now, you would think that would be a moment of relief for the Western Roman Empire.
You would think.
But the sources you shared suggest that's kind of when things really started to unravel.
Yeah, and this gets to the heart of one of the big issues that plagued the late Roman Empire, internal conflict. See, when Attila was around, he was a common enemy. He united various factions within the empire against him. But with him gone, all those internal tensions, all that jockeying for power, it all comes bubbling to the surface.
It's like they could unite against an external enemy,
Yeah.
but keeping it together during peacetime was a whole other challenge.
Exactly. And this is where the story of Flavius Aetius becomes really important.
Okay, Aetius. He was the Western Roman Empire's top general.
The Magister Militum. Think of him as like the supreme commander of the Roman army in the West. And he was the mastermind behind their victory at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains.
Okay, so for those who maybe haven't committed every Roman battle to memory, remind us what was significant about that battle.
This is 451 AD. Attila and his Huns are on a rampage across Europe, and Aetius manages to assemble this coalition of forces, Romans, Visigoths, Franks, even some Alans, to stop them.
Wow, that's quite the coalition. So he wasn't just relying on traditional Roman legions.
No, she was adapting to the realities of the time. And this is something that we see time and again in military history. Successful commanders are often the ones who can adapt their strategies and tactics to the specific challenges they face.
So what's so interesting about this, I think, is that Aetius is using what could be seen as the enemy's tactics, right?
Absolutely. For centuries, Rome had relied on its legions. These were highly disciplined, heavily armed infantry. But by the 5th century AD, the empire was facing a different kind of enemy. Fast-moving, horse-borne warriors like the Huns. So Aetius incorporates cavalry into his forces, including allied cavalry, which was not the traditional Roman way of doing things.
It's like he's realizing that the old playbook doesn't always work. You've got to adjust to the new realities of the battlefield.
And this shift towards incorporating barbarian troops, as the Romans called them, was something that had been happening for a while. But it really comes to the forefront with Aetius. On the one hand, it allowed the Romans to field larger armies.
Yeah, you need more manpower.
You need the numbers. But it also had this unintended consequence. It integrated these groups into the fabric of the empire, which would come back to bite them later.
Foreshadowing.
Oh, big time. Because here's the crazy part. Just 3 years after this incredible victory at the Catalonian Plains, Aetius is betrayed and executed by the emperor he's serving, Valentinian III.
Wait, what? The guy saves the empire and then gets stabbed in the back by his own emperor?
I know, it's crazy, right?
That's a Game of Thrones level betrayal.
It really is. And our sources suggest that Valentinian might have been influenced by jealous courtiers, possibly even by the man who would become his successor, this guy named Maximian.
So it's not just about military strategy, it's about court intrigue, power struggles, all that stuff happening behind the scenes.
Exactly. And what's striking is that by eliminating Aetius, Valentinian essentially robbed the empire of its most skilled military leader, right when they desperately needed strong leadership.
It's almost like he didn't realize that the Huns, while a major threat, weren't the only problem. Removing Aetius creates this power vacuum, this instability that, that other threats are going to exploit.
And exploit they did. It wasn't long before a new threat emerged, and this one came from an unexpected source, a power struggle within the Roman court itself.
Okay, so we've got an emperor who eliminates his best general. Now we've got a power struggle brewing. This is not looking good for the Western Roman Empire. What happens next?
Well, Maximian, the guy who allegedly instigated Aetius's downfall, steps into the power vacuum, right? But his ambitions don't end there.
Power corrupts.
He commits this shocking act that throws the Western Roman Empire into further chaos.
What did he do?
He rapes Valentinian's wife.
Whoa.
It's a blatant abuse of power, and it ultimately leads to Maximian's downfall because Valentinian, outraged, has him assassinated.
Okay, so much for stability within the empire. This is getting more and more like a soap opera, right?
Totally. But the consequences of these internal power struggles, they're way more significant than just palace drama. Because before his death, Maximian had forced Valentinian's widow, Licinia, to marry him. And this seemingly desperate act is going to inadvertently set the stage for the next major conflict, the Vandal invasion of Rome.
Hold on, back up a sec. The Vandals. Weren't they like a Germanic tribe that has set up shop in North Africa? How did they get pulled into this whole Roman mess?
It's a great example of how these seemingly isolated events can have these ripple effects, right? Licinia, desperate to escape her situation and maybe get some revenge, sends a secret plea for help to a pretty powerful figure, Gaiseric, king of the Vandals.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. A Roman empress appeals to, what they would have considered a barbarian king.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, there's already a family connection.
What do you mean?
Licinia's daughter was married to Gaiseric's son, so you've got this web of family ties tangled up in political turmoil.
So it's like family drama on an imperial scale. And how does Gaiseric respond to this plea for help?
He was a cunning guy, Gaiseric, ambitious. He'd had his eye on Roman territory for a while and had been building up this pretty impressive naval force. Licinia's plea, perfect opportunity. He uses it as a pretext to launch a full-scale invasion of the Western Roman Empire.
So less about rescuing a damsel in distress and more about strategic opportunism.
Yeah, spot on. And the Romans, well, they were already weakened by all the internal strife. They'd lost their best general, remember? They were in no shape to deal with a maritime invasion of this scale. So Gaiseric and his forces sail across the Mediterranean, and they make a beeline for the heart of the Roman Empire, the city of Rome itself.
And this brings us to one of the most infamous events in Roman history, the sack of Rome in 455 AD, which, by the way, is where we get the word vandalism.
It's not just a military defeat. It's this huge psychological blow.
It's like the ultimate symbol of Roman decline. So let's break it down. What happens when Gaiseric and his Vandals actually reach Rome? Do they meet any resistance?
Well, the Romans, they're in a state of panic. They try to appease Gaiseric. They actually kill Maximian, thinking that'll be enough. Hey, look, we got rid of the guy. Please don't sack our city. But they miscalculated.
They thought they could just get rid of one bad guy and everything would be okay.
It shows how desperate they were and how little they understood Gaiseric's true ambitions.
Yeah, they were thinking short term while Gaiseric was playing the long game.
Exactly.
So what happens next? Did they put up a fight?
Surprisingly, no. Pope Leo I, the same pope who had convinced Attila not to attack Rome a few years earlier, goes out to negotiate with Gaiseric. They strike a deal. The Vandals can enter the city without a fight, but they have to spare the lives of the citizens.
Sounds like a deal with the devil.
And, predictably, Gaiseric doesn't exactly keep his word.
He doesn't just politely take a few souvenirs, does he?
No. While there's no evidence of, widespread massacres, they spend 2 weeks stripping the city bare. They loot temples, palaces, even the imperial residences. This is where we get the word vandalism from. Senseless destruction and looting.
And what happens to Licinia, the empress whose plea for help kind of started all of this?
Well, ironically, she ends up a captive of the Vandals. She's taken to North Africa along with her daughters. The very act that she hoped would free her leads to her imprisonment. It's like the ultimate tragic twist of fate.
So let me get this straight. We've gone from the death of Attila, something that, on the surface you think would be good for the Western Roman Empire, to the assassination of their best general, to a crazy power struggle in the Roman court, and now the sack of Rome itself. It's like one disaster after another.
And it highlights how internal conflict, how poor leadership, how failing to adapt to changing circumstances, it can all contribute to the downfall of even the most powerful empires.
And this is just the beginning of the end, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Things are about to get even more interesting. We'll be right back to dive deeper into the final years of the Western Roman Empire and unpack what it all means for military strategy and the course of history. The sack of Rome in 455, it wasn't the final blow, but it was a wake-up call. I mean, it showed everyone just how vulnerable the Western Roman Empire had become.
It's like they were on borrowed time. So what happens next? What does the military landscape look like after this devastating blow to their image, their prestige?
The next few decades are a mess.
Yeah.
You've got short-lived emperors, ambitious generals, alliances shifting constantly.
Sounds exhausting.
Oh, it was. But for anyone who loves military history, this period is gold. I mean, it really shows you what can bring down an empire, what factors are at play, and the Roman military, they were going through some major changes.
Let's break it down. Who are the key players? What were the big conflicts? What are the military lessons here?
One of the most significant developments is the growing reliance on the foederati.
Foederati, refresh my memory.
Essentially, they were barbarian troops who were integrated into the Roman army.
Oh, right. Like we were talking about with Aetius in the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. He had Visigoths, Franks.
Exactly. That was becoming more and more common. By this point, the Romans were having trouble recruiting enough Roman citizens for the army.
So they're outsourcing their military to the very groups that were often, a threat to their borders.
It was a gamble, a big gamble.
Doesn't sound like the smartest move.
It wasn't, but they were desperate. They needed manpower, they were short on funds, and they thought, hey, maybe we can use these guys to fight other threats.
So use barbarians to fight barbarians.
Exactly. Except these federatis, they gain valuable military experience. They become more powerful within the empire.
And I bet that creates some tension.
Oh yeah, big time. It's a powder keg waiting to explode. And in 476 AD, boom, a Germanic general named Odoacer, he commands a large contingent of these federati. He launches a rebellion against Orist. Now, Orist, he is essentially the power behind the throne at this point, controlling the puppet emperor Romulus Augustulus.
Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor.
Yeah.
The empire founded by Romulus ends with Romulus. It's kind of poetic in a tragic sort of way.
It is, and it really highlights this idea of cyclical history. But what's interesting about Odoacer is he doesn't declare himself emperor.
Right.
No, he sends the imperial regalia back to the Eastern Roman emperors. He basically says, look, you're the only Roman emperor now.
Sweet. The Western Roman Empire just fades away. No big final battle, no heroic last stand.
Not really. I mean, 476 AD is a turning point. It marks the end of Roman authority in the West. But it wasn't this sudden collapse. It was the culmination of decades of internal strife, bad decisions, and the slow erosion of Roman power.
Like we've been talking about, the sack of Rome, that was a huge turning point. It showed everyone that Rome wasn't invincible.
Exactly. It shattered that myth. And from that point on, it was just a matter of time.
So for all the military history buffs out there, what are the big takeaways from this period? What can we learn from the fall of the Western Roman Empire?
I think one of the biggest lessons is don't neglect your navy. The Romans, they built their empire on their legions. They were masters of land warfare, but they let their navy decline.
Yeah.
And that left them vulnerable to attacks, like the Vandal invasion of Rome.
It's like they forgot that controlling the seas was just as important as controlling the land.
Especially in a place like the Mediterranean. So lesson number one, you got to have a balanced military.
Okay, what else?
Well, lesson number two is all about leadership, or rather, the lack of it.
Yeah, we saw that with Valentinian getting rid of Aetius, all the political infighting, the reliance on the foederati that backfired.
It all boils down to this. Internal conflict can be just as deadly as any external enemy. If you're not unified, if you don't have strong leadership, you're going to crumble. Doesn't matter how big your army is.
Okay, that's two pretty big lessons.
Yeah.
Any others?
One more, and this one's about adaptability. The Romans, for all their military achievements, they struggled to adapt to the changing nature of warfare.
They were kind of stuck in the old ways of doing things.
Yeah, they were facing new enemies with new tactics, and they didn't always adjust their strategy.
They were fighting the last war, not the current one.
Exactly. You've got to be able to adapt, to innovate, to think outside the box. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind. And that's what happened to the Western Roman Empire.
It's fascinating because these lessons, they aren't just about ancient Rome. I mean, they're relevant today, right?
Absolutely. Think about modern militaries. They're constantly having to adapt to new threats, new technologies, new ways of fighting. And the importance of strong leadership, of unity, that's timeless.
It's like the names and the dates change, but the underlying principles, they stay the same.
Exactly. And that's what makes history so valuable. It can teach us so much about ourselves, about the challenges we face, and about the choices we make.
Now, we've been focusing on the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the military defeats, the political turmoil. But there's another side of the story, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, they carried on for centuries.
And they faced a lot of the same challenges. Internal conflicts, external threats, yet they survived.
And that's what makes them so fascinating. How did they do it? What were their secrets to survival? What can we learn from them? That's a story for another time.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time talking about, well, the decline and fall of the Western Roman Empire.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, they carried on, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, for centuries.
And I think there's a lot that military history buffs can learn from them, from their resilience, from how they adapted.
Absolutely. I mean, they faced a lot of the same challenges that the West did.
Yeah.
Internal strife, external enemies.
Barbarians at the gates.
Exactly. But they found ways to survive.
So what were their secrets? How did they manage to hold on for so long?
I think it's a combination of factors. First, geography. They were in a much more defensible position than the Western Empire. Constantinople, their capital, was this natural fortress, strong walls, a strategic location. It controlled key trade routes.
So location, location, location. It's important in real estate, and it's important in empire building, too.
Absolutely. But it wasn't just about geography. The Byzantines were also incredibly skilled diplomats. They were masters of playing different powers against each other, forming alliances, keeping their enemies off balance.
Sounds like they learned a few lessons from the mistakes of the West.
I think they did. And they weren't afraid to adapt, to change.
In what way?
Well, they incorporated elements of Greek culture and administration into their system. It made them more flexible, more resilient than the rigid Roman model in the West.
So it's like they took the best of both worlds, Roman and Greek.
Yeah, they created this hybrid empire that was, I think, better suited to the challenges of the time. And we can't forget the role of religion.
Right. The Byzantines were very much a Christian empire.
Yeah, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and it became this unifying force. The emperor was seen as both a political and a spiritual leader. It gave him a level of authority that Western emperors just didn't have.
So it sounds like the recipe for Byzantine survival was this mix of strategic location, savvy diplomacy, cultural adaptability, and a strong religious foundation.
That's a pretty good summary.
Yeah,
But even with all of that, they weren't invincible.
Of course not. No empire lasts forever.
They faced constant threats, the Persians, the rise of Islam, and they had their own internal struggles. Power struggles, religious disputes.
It's like the same old song, just a different verse. No empire, no matter how well organized or strategically positioned, can escape these challenges.
That's true. But what's remarkable about the Byzantines is how they innovated, how they adapted to these challenges.
Give me an example.
Well, take their military. They developed this new type of cavalry unit, the cataphracts. Heavily armored, very effective.
And weren't they also pioneers in naval warfare?
Oh, absolutely. They had this powerful fleet, and they used this secret weapon, Greek fire.
Greek fire? It sounds almost mythical. Was this like an actual thing?
It was very real and terrifying. It was this incendiary liquid that they could project on enemy ships.
And it set the ships on fire.
It was incredibly effective. We don't know the exact formula. It's been lost to history. But contemporary accounts describe it as this devastating weapon, both psychologically and tactically.
It's like something out of a fantasy novel.
I know. It helped them control the seas for centuries.
So, as the West is falling apart, the East is innovating, adapting, holding on. What finally brought them down?
Well, eventually they faced a combination of problems that they just couldn't overcome. Economic decline, political instability, and the rise of a new, very powerful enemy, the Ottoman Turks.
The Ottomans, right? They were the ones who finally conquered Constantinople.
Yeah. In 1453, they had mastered gunpowder technology. They had this huge, well-trained army. They laid siege to Constantinople, and after a long fight, the city fell.
And that was the end of the Byzantine Empire.
It was. And it's interesting, right? You see a lot of parallels between the fall of the West and the fall of the East. Internal weakness, external pressure, the rise of a new power.
History repeating itself.
It often does. But I think even though the Byzantines eventually fell, they offer some valuable lessons. They show us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, resilience, adaptability, and a willingness to change can make a big difference.
It's not just about military might. It's about having a system that can adapt to new challenges.
Exactly. And that's a lesson that's as relevant today as it was 1,000 years ago.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the decline of the Western Roman Empire, the resilience of the Byzantines, the military lessons we can learn from both. And it's clear that the Roman Empire, even in its fall, continues to fascinate and teach us.
Absolutely. It's a period of history that's full of drama, intrigue, and, yeah, some pretty epic military blunders.
But most importantly, I think it offers a reminder that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It's a source of knowledge, of wisdom, of insights that can help us understand our own world.
I completely agree. And who knows, maybe by studying the past, we can avoid making the same mistakes in the future.
One can hope. That's all the time we have for today, but we encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating period in history, read the sources, question the narratives, and draw your own conclusions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Roman Empire.